The year is 1147. You are born in a damp, smoky hut on the edge of a forested valley, somewhere in what would, centuries later, be called Northern Europe. But for now, it is simply land. Land watched over by a lord you will never meet, taxed by a king you will never see, and prayed over by a church that decides who is worthy to live and who is not. Your mother is exhausted, her body trembling as she lies on a straw-filled bed. She is young by modern standards, yet already weathered by childbirth and hard labor. The midwife, older than your grandmother, wraps you in rough wool and places you beside the hearth, where the smoke chokes before it escapes through a hole in the ceiling. The air is cold, the floor is dirt, and your home is shared with chickens. You do not cry. You are too weak. Outside, it is winter. Food is scarce. Your father is out hunting, though most likely he is setting snares for rabbits or fishing under a layer of ice. His hands are cracked and blackened from frost, his back bent from carrying firewood, water, and the burden of keeping a family alive when the world doesn't care if you make it to spring. You will not be given a name for several days. It is tradition. Children often don't survive the week, and names are not wasted on ghosts. Your first memories are of cold, not the kind that bites gently, like the autumn wind brushing your cheeks. No, the cold of the Dark Ages is unrelenting. It lives in your bones. You wake to it, sleep in it, breathe through it. The floor beneath your straw mat is bare earth. Every morning your toes greet frost long before they find your shoes, if you have any. Most days, you do not. A coarse wool tunic, handed down from someone else's child, scratches your skin, and you itch constantly. Lice are a fact of life. So is filth. So is hunger. There is no formal education. You learn by watching, listening, hurting. Your mother teaches you not with books, but with warning looks and swift slaps when you wander too close to the fire or the family's only pot. Your father rarely speaks, and when he does, it is in short, sharp commands. He is tired. All men are tired. You are 3 winters old when the first death occurs in your memory. It is a neighbor, an older boy who lived in the next hut. He had a cough for weeks. Then one day he coughed blood. They buried him in a shallow grave behind the chapel, and by spring, no one spoke of him again. Life is not sacred. It is simply something to endure. The priest says it is all God's plan, that suffering in this life will buy you a place in the next. But you do not understand God yet. You only understand that when the food runs out, your stomach twists so tightly that you cry at night, quietly, because crying makes your father angry. Rats are common. So are bruises. You once stepped on a nail and limped for a week before the wound turned black, then yellow, then scabbed over. You survived. Not everyone does. One night, there is a knock at the door. Your father stiffens. He does not like knocks, especially not at night. When he opens the wooden plank door, wind bursts through like a ghost. A soldier stands there. Not for your family, but passing through. He asks for shelter. Your mother nods, silent. That night, you sleep beside a man with a sword. His boots are crusted with mud and blood, and he smells like iron. He speaks of war in faraway places, of kings, banners, and burning villages. You do not understand the words, but the fire in his eyes is unforgettable. For the first time, you see what power looks like, and it terrifies you. By your 6th winter, you can already carry a pail of water from the stream without spilling it. You can skin a rabbit with a dull blade. You can tell whether the mushrooms are poisonous by smell alone. You are learning. because to be ignorant is to be dead. One morning, the snow falls thick, and your mother does not rise from bed. She is hot to the touch, sweating despite the cold. Your father sends you to fetch the priest. You run until your legs give out, and then crawl the rest of the way. When you return, the priest sprinkles her with holy water. She whispers your name once, barely audible. Then she is gone. The burial is quick. The priest mumbles scripture while your father stands still, expressionless. He does not cry. You do. That night, the hut feels colder than ever before, not because of the temperature, but because the fire of her presence is no longer there. That is the winter you grow old, even though you are still just a child. Your first memories are of cold, not the kind that bites gently, like the autumn wind brushing your cheeks. No, the cold of the dark ages is unrelenting. It lives in your bones. You wake to it, sleep in it, breathe through it. The floor beneath your straw mat is bare earth. Every morning your toes greet frost long before they find your shoes, if you have any. Most days, you do not. A coarse wool tunic, handed down from someone else's child, scratches your skin, and you itch constantly. Lice are a fact of life. So is filth. So is hunger. There is no formal education. You learn by watching, listening, hurting. Your mother teaches you not with books, but with warning looks and swift slaps when you wander too close to the fire or the family's only pot. Your father rarely speaks, and when he does, it is in short, sharp commands. He is tired. All men are tired. You are 3 winters old when the first death occurs in your memory. It is a neighbor, an older boy who lived in the next hut. He had a cough for weeks. Then one day he coughed blood. They buried him in a shallow grave behind the chapel, and by spring, no one spoke of him again. Life is not sacred. It is simply something to endure. The priest says it is all God's plan, that suffering in this life will buy you a place in the next. But you do not understand God yet. You only understand that when the food runs out, your stomach twists so tightly that you cry at night, quietly, because crying makes your father angry. Rats are common. So are bruises. You once stepped on a nail and limped for a week before the wound turned black, then yellow, then scabbed over. You survived. Not everyone does. One night, there is a knock at the door. Your father stiffens. He does not like knocks, especially not at night. When he opens the wooden plank door, wind bursts through like a ghost. A soldier stands there. Not for your family, but passing through. He asks for shelter. Your mother nods, silent. That night, you sleep beside a man with a sword. His boots are crusted with mud and blood, and he smells like iron. He speaks of war in faraway places, of kings, banners, and burning villages. You do not understand the words, but the fire in his eyes is unforgettable. For the first time, you see what power looks like, and it terrifies you. By your 6th winter, you can already carry a pail of water from the stream without spilling it. You can skin a rabbit with a dull blade. You can tell whether the mushrooms are poisonous by smell alone. You are learning, because to be ignorant is to be dead. One morning, the snow falls thick, and your mother does not rise from bed. She is hot to the touch, sweating despite the cold. Your father sends you to fetch the priest. You run until your legs give out, and then crawl the rest of the way. When you return, the priest sprinkles her with holy water. She whispers your name once, barely audible. Then she is gone. The burial is quick. The priest mumbles scripture while your father stands still, expressionless. He does not cry. You do. That night, the hut feels colder than ever before, not because of the temperature, but because the fire of her presence is no longer there. That is the winter you grow old, even though you are still just a child. The winter comes early that year. The frost creeps in like a slow-moving death, settling into the bones of your home and your body. Your sister coughs through the nights, and you wake often to check if she's still breathing. You learn the sound of desperation. It's the silence between her gasps. You begin trading favors for food, chopping wood for the widow 2 huts down, helping the old shepherd bury a lamb too stiff to stand. In return, a turnip here, a crust of bread there. You keep the worst for yourself. You are not noble, but you are her brother. When the rats come, it's almost a relief. At least something is moving. Something to catch. You set traps. You boil them. You pretend it's stew. The priest still visits. He says suffering is God's trial. You believe him at first. Then he eats from a silver dish and rides off with full saddlebags. Your belief dies faster than your father did. The day the barn burns, you do not scream. You do not even cry. You stare as the flames lick through the straw and climb into the rafters. Your sister clutches your arm. You say nothing. The silence is heavier than the smoke. It is time to leave. You do not tell anyone. One morning you pack what little you have, some dried root, a knife, a patch of wool, and you take her hand. The village watches you go. No one stops you. Some nod. Some don't look at all. All of them understand. The road is worse than you imagined. Mud that sucks at your feet. Thorny hedges. Nights so cold the stars feel like shards of broken glass. But for the first time in your life, the world moves beneath your feet. You are not stuck. You learn to beg in towns, to speak softly and lie convincingly. You become invisible, which in this age is a kind of magic. Then, one day, you meet a man at a crossroads. He has a scar across his lip and eyes like coal. He doesn't ask your name. He only asks, "Can you swing a blade?" You nod. He laughs. "Good. You'll do." That night, you sleep near a real fire, with meat, with warmth, with a group that does not ask, only offers. Bandits, perhaps. Mercenaries, more likely. You're too tired to care. Tomorrow, you will learn to hold a sword. The first time you hold a sword, it feels like holding a piece of death. It's heavier than you thought. Not just in weight, but in meaning. You swing it once and your arms ache. Twice, and you know you are weak. That changes quickly. The man with coal eyes. His name is Merrick. He trains you. Not kindly, but effectively. He teaches you not how to fight, but how to win. Where to aim, where to stab, when to run. Mercy, he tells you, is for the rich and the dead. Your sister stays with the camp followers. Women, cooks, strays like you. She eats now. Laughs sometimes. That is enough for you. Your first real battle is not a battle. It's a raid. A tax cart from the local baron. Poorly guarded. Merrick plans it all. You simply follow. It is over in minutes. Steel clashes. A scream. Then silence. You look down at your blade. It is red. You do not know whose blood it is. You vomit. No one mocks you. They all did the same, once. That night, you are given your share. Coins, bread, a cloak. The cloak is warm. The bread is fresh. The coins feel like freedom. You learn quickly after that. Each job is easier than the last. You ride now. Your shoulders grow broad. Your hands rough. Merrick nods at you once. That means everything. One evening, you find a boy your age crying in a ditch after a fight. He begs for his life. You hesitate. You remember your father, your sister, the rats, the barn. You walk away. That is your mercy. Winter turns to spring. You are no longer starving, no longer cold, but a hunger remains, not in your stomach, but in your chest. A hollow space that food cannot fill. You wonder what lies beyond these woods, beyond these towns, what it means to live, not just survive. Merrick sees the question in your eyes. One night, he sits beside you and says, "There's more to this world. Kings, cathedrals, seas that stretch to the edge of God's map. But all of it belongs to those willing to take it." You do not sleep well that night, not because of fear, but because, for the first time, you believe him. You travel farther now, beyond the forests that cradled your youth, past fields stitched with the bones of old wars. You see your first castle, not a ruin, but whole and alive. Flags flutter like arrogant birds. Guards patrol in polished armor. You are not impressed. Merrick calls them fat lords in stone prisons. He spits when he says it. One night, you sneak into a village beside one of these castles. You're meant to scout. Instead, you meet her. She sells candles, wears a locket. Her hands are soft, her voice softer. She looks at you like you are a story, not a threat. No one has looked at you that way before. You lie. Say you're a traveling apprentice. She believes you, or chooses to. You visit 3 nights in a row. On the 4th, you do not come. Merrick says you're sloppy, distracted. You know he's right, but you can't stop thinking about her, or the life you glimpsed for those brief evenings. A life where you might have stayed, might have built something. That week, your band is hired by a rebellious lord. Gold flows like mead. You storm a manor, fight in a field, burn a watchtower. You return to the village. It is gone. Ashes. The castle above, too quiet. You never see her again. Not even her locket. Something dies in you that night. Not innocence, that left long ago, but hope, maybe, or softness. Merrick says nothing, only puts a hand on your shoulder. It's the closest thing to comfort he offers. From then on, you harden, become sharper, more brutal. The blade fits your hand now, like it was always meant to. Still, some nights, you dream of her. The locket, the candlelight, the life that never was. The year the sickness comes, it smells like smoke and rot and something worse. Fear. Whole villages empty, doors marked with crosses. No priest dares enter. No lord dares help. You see a man coughing blood into his hands, then trying to hide it. He's dead within days. So is his family. So are half the towns you pass. Merrick orders masks, cloth soaked in vinegar and ash. He burns everything you touch. No fires for warmth. No meat unless it's burned black. You start to look like ghosts. At night, you hear things. Screams without owners. Bells that toll for no one. And then you meet the prophet. A blind woman on the side of the road. She speaks your name before you say it. Tells you your blood carries 2 fates. One written in fire, one in frost. You laugh at first, but her words burrow. You begin to wonder if she saw the truth. If death follows you, not by chance, but by design. Your sister falls ill. Her skin turns gray. You carry her to the hills, praying to gods you've never known. She survives, just barely. But her hair stays white from then on. The sickness breaks you. Not your body, but your will. You become crueler, colder. Kill without blinking. Trust no one. Merrick approves. He says you finally become a man. You do not correct him, but deep down, you wonder what kind of man that is. You keep the prophet's words like a splinter in your soul. Fire or frost? Which will it be? You enter a city for the first time. Real stone streets. towers that claw the sky, and noise that never sleeps. The smell is worse than the camps. Sweat, sewage, desperation. But opportunity drips from every alley. Merrick disappears into the underworld. Gambling dens, black markets, crooked guilds. You follow. At first it's odd jobs. Guarding shipments, collecting debts, delivering threats. Then, one night, you're told to kill a duke's messenger. No reason given. No questions asked. You do it. Fast. Clean. A pouch of silver waits for you. Twice as heavy as your guilt. Your name spreads. Not your real one. That was buried with your innocence. They call you Rook. Like the bird. Like the piece on a chessboard. Quiet. Deadly. Unseen until too late. The Thief Guild invites you in. Not with fanfare. With tests. Locks to pick. Lies to tell. Loyalties to fake. You pass them all. In a month, you're leading crews. In 3, you're stealing from nobles. By winter, you steal something else. A crown. Not a real one. A ceremonial piece. Encrusted with rubies. Useless to a king. Priceless to a collector. You take it during a masquerade. In disguise. In plain sight. You are never caught. The city changes you. You wear better clothes. Speak softer. Think quicker. You start to imagine power as something you could grasp. Not with steel, but with strategy. But Merrick watches. Quiet. Wary. He does not say it, but you know. He sees something slipping in you. Something he fears. And you begin to dream bigger. Of thrones. Of armies. Of not just surviving history, but shaping it. The city gives much, but it takes more. Power, it turns out, is never clean. One night, a deal goes bad. You're meeting with a rival crew under truce. Merrick says it smells wrong. You ignore him. They ambush you. 5 of your men fall before steel leaves its sheath. You barely escape, bleeding, limping, dragging one survivor with you through a sewer that smells like death and memories. The survivor is your sister. A bolt caught her in the leg. You carry her the whole way. She doesn't speak, but her eyes say it all. Not pain, not fear. Disappointment. You recover in silence. Merrick doesn't say I told you so. He simply hands you a knife and a list of names. You cross off each one. Not with ink. In the process, you uncover a deeper truth. The betrayal came not from the rival crew, but from within your own. One of your captains sold you out for gold and a promise of safety. His name is Elric. You trained him. When you confront him, he begs, offers to leave, to vanish. He weeps like a child. You hesitate, and then you don't. Merrick watches, arms crossed. Your sister watches too, limping now, but stronger. They say nothing. You bury Elric under the old well. The silence afterward is heavy, but clean. That night, you dream again of the prophet, her voice echoing, fire or frost? What burns? What breaks? You wake before dawn. The city lies still, but something inside you has shifted. You no longer wonder what kind of man you're becoming. You know. Snow comes like a warning. Thick, heavy, relentless. The city slows, then stops. Fires burn longer. Bread runs shorter. Fear returns. Not of plague or blades, but of hunger. That's when the lords turn on each other. With coin tight and tempers frayed, old alliances crumble. The city fractures into warring factions. Streets become front lines. Inns become forts. You choose no side, at first. But war demands choices. One noble offers you gold. Another offers secrets. A third offers your sister's safety. Passage to the coast. A boat. A future far from this cursed place. You take the third. In return, he asks you to burn a rival's granaries. A simple job. You plan it clean. At night, in silence. No one should die, but they do. Children, workers, a pregnant woman. You didn't know they were inside. Or maybe you didn't ask. You get your reward. Your sister leaves the city. You stand by the docks, watching her sail into the fog, tears frozen on her face. Merrick doesn't speak to you for a week. When he finally does, it's only one word. Worth. You don't answer, because you don't know. The city burns through winter. Walls collapse. Markets die. Men you once drank with hang from the gates. And you, Rook, rise higher. The chaos clears space for kings made of ash and blood. You seize it. But some nights, by firelight, you whisper apologies into your cup. Not because you're sorry, but because no one's left to hear them. They call you Lord of the Ashes now. Not to your face, yet. But in the streets, in the shadows, your name is myth. You wear finer robes. You speak in council halls. You drink from silver, but you still sleep with a dagger beneath your pillow. One night, Merrick places something on your desk. A mask. For the masquerade, he says. You pick it up. It's black, shaped like a raven's face. Sharp, silent. You don't wear it to the ball. You become it. That night, you dance with spies. You laugh with enemies. You toast with the same men you plan to poison. You're not just surviving anymore. You're playing the game. And you're winning. But then, a mirror. Just an accident. A hallway. A turn. A glimpse. You stop. The face in the glass is not yours. Not the child who fled burning villages. Not the thief beneath moonlight. Not even the killer from winter. It is someone colder, sharper, hungrier. You look away and realize the mask never left your face. Not really. Merrick sees it too. He doesn't say anything, just studies you longer these days, as if waiting for someone he once knew to come back. But he won't say it, because maybe that person is gone. Power, once claimed, demands more. You hold the city now, not by title, but by blood. Markets bend to your taxes. Gangs answer your summons. Even nobles speak your name with careful reverence. But control is a leaking vessel. Word arrives from the south. A foreign fleet has landed. Not traders, soldiers. Knights draped in banners of gold and crimson. They call themselves the Cleansing Flame. Their goal? To restore order to godless lands. You are their first target. The city panics. Half the lords flee. The rest beg you for protection. Suddenly, you are not just a shadow. You are a leader. Unwanted, unelected, undeniable. Merrick returns with news. The flame is brutal. Villages burned. Prisoners crucified. No negotiations. No mercy. You have two options. Run or fight. You choose the third. Deceive. You ride out to meet their envoy in full finery. Face bare. Hands open. You speak of treaties, tribute, of shared enemies. The envoy listens, amused, then spits in your face. You are not a lord, he says. You are ash, pretending to be fire. That night, you burn their camp. Silent assassins, poisoned wells, exploding barrels hidden in wagons of wine. Hundreds dead. It doesn't stop them. But it sends a message. You are not ash. The city, shaken, rallies. Not out of love, out of fear. The people know you now. Not as a thief or a ghost or a mask. They know you as the one who will not kneel. The cleansing flame returns. Not scouts this time, but an army. Steel in rows. Horns in the fog. Their torches burn bright against the winter dusk. The siege begins. Days blur. Arrows darken the sky. Walls crack. Food runs thin. Rats become rations. Fear becomes prayer. The nobles vanish. Some escape. Some slit their own throats. But you remain. You and Merrick. He leads the walls. You command the tunnels. You whisper orders, light fires, bribe deserters, poison wells. No act is too cruel, no tactic too low. This is survival, you tell yourself. This is war. Then, silence. One morning, the horns stop. You climb the highest tower. Through smoke, you see them, pulling back. Horses kicking dust, flags retreating. Why? Merrick finds out first. The northern lords, he says, breathless. They've come to oppose the flame. Something about honor, or revenge, or just wanting to kill someone else. You don't care why. You've survived. The city sings your name that night. Rook, Rook, Rook. They chant in drunken circles. But you don't join them. You stand in the tower again, alone. Because you know. You didn't win. You just outlasted everyone who lost. Years pass. The city changes. Walls rebuilt. Flags redrawn. Markets bloom. Children grow up never knowing the smell of ash in the air. But they know your name. You are not a king. Kings require crowns. You have none. You sit on no throne, wear no jewels. But power wraps around you like a cloak nonetheless. No law is passed without your nod. No war declared without your silence. You are the center of everything, and yet belong to nothing. Merrick has grown quiet. He walks slower now, drinks more tea than wine. One evening, he leaves a note. I'm going home. Whatever that means. You don't stop him. The fire in the hearth crackles louder than the silence in the room. You're surrounded by luxury, and yet more alone than when you slept beneath bridges. One night, a girl appears. Not a threat, a storyteller. She's blind in one eye, sharp in voice. She says, I've come to write your tale. You tell her, there's nothing worth writing. She smiles. That's what they all say, before they tell me everything. And so, for the first time in years, you speak the full truth. The story of the alley, the story of the mask, the story of the mirror, the story of the fire that never quite went out. She listens and writes. And when she leaves, she says only this. You were not the hero, but you were the one who lived. The first flakes of snow had begun to fall. It came softly in the dark, silent and slow, cloaking the ruined countryside in pale sorrow. The world beyond the crumbled walls of the stronghold was transforming into a white hush. You stood near the watchtower, cloak drawn tightly against the cold, breath rising in pale plumes before your face. Life in the stronghold had begun to feel like something permanent, though you knew deep down that nothing in this age lasted. You had come to accept the rhythm of things, waking with frost on your blanket, eating whatever stew could be conjured from the root cellar, fixing tools by torchlight. But tonight, something shifted. It was in the air, a heaviness, a question. Rumors had crept in with traders passing through, talk of warlords uniting, of new powers forming across the northern valleys. It was said they were gathering under one banner, led by a former knight-turned-prophet, a man who claimed he had spoken to an angel in fire. You didn't know whether to laugh or pray. Around the fire that night, the elder woman known only as Hesta spoke of omens. Snow on the last harvest moon, she murmured, half lost in thought. It means a hard death before spring. No one challenged her. Her words hung there like smoke. You found yourself thinking more often of the boy you had once been, of the old farm and the small dog that used to follow your heels through the hayfields. That world seemed like it belonged to someone else, someone soft. The next morning, a rider arrived. His horse was trembling. half mad with fatigue, and the man nearly fell from the saddle. You helped carry him inside, laid him by the fire. He was burned across one side of his face, and muttered strange things in broken sentences. Fire in the sky. They came. Not men, not men. He died before dawn. That same day, you were summoned by the captain of the Stronghold Guard, a woman named Cedra, grizzled and sharp-eyed, her armor patched from too many fights. She asked you to ride with her and a small group eastward to investigate the village of Dunwich. No word had come in weeks. The journey took 3 days. Snow deepened. Wolves howled in the forest, and each night felt longer than the last. Cedra told stories in hushed tones, of raiders who burned entire monasteries, of strange lights seen dancing on the moors. When you arrived at Dunwich, it was empty, not destroyed, not ransacked, just abandoned. Tables still set for meals, fires long since burned out, doors swinging in the wind. You felt something in your gut twist. In the church, you found writing on the walls, scrawled in charcoal. We heard the voice from the mountain. It spoke our names. No bodies, no blood, just silence. Cedra ordered a retreat. She was pale, her sword drawn for the entire ride back. Winter came fast. Blizzards swept across the land like vengeful spirits. Crops froze in the ground. 2 children died in their sleep one night from the cold. The stronghold began to feel less like a refuge and more like a tomb. But you endured. You hunted in the forests for rabbits. You shared songs by the fire with others who had become like family. You helped repair the roof of the old chapel. You learned to patch leather with frozen fingers and to read the sky for coming storms. There were nights of despair when even the strongest wept. But there were also moments of strange beauty. Sunrises that painted the snow gold, the sound of laughter echoing through stone halls, the comfort of someone sharing the last crust of bread. One morning, the trees around the stronghold were covered in ice, so thick they gleamed like glass. It was then that a boy spotted something on the horizon, a single figure approaching on foot, wrapped in dark furs. The figure collapsed just outside the gates. You helped carry him in. He was young, barely older than you, with a wound on his leg and eyes wild with fear. When he finally spoke, his voice was cracked from thirst. They call themselves the Flameborn. They come in the night. They take people, not to kill them, to make them forget. He fell into sleep before anyone could question further. That night, you tied your name again to the ancient oak, but this time with a second strip of cloth, one bearing the names of the 2 children who had died. You burned a small candle beneath it and whispered into the cold, "Let them be remembered. Let the story go on." The cold had become a presence all its own, no longer simply a season, but a silent creature that moved through the corridors, curled in the corners, and pressed itself against every wall. It gnawed at the bones and froze the breath before it left your lips. Yet something colder had entered the stronghold. Fear. After the journey to Dunwich, people spoke more softly. Meals were shorter. Laughter was rare, and the chapel remained lit at all hours with guttering candles. The old priest, who once delivered sermons of endurance and the mercy of heaven, now only muttered verses no one could fully hear. His eyes looked elsewhere when he prayed. You had tried to sleep, but the dreams had turned. They no longer offered memories of your childhood, of green hills and warm bread. Now they came in fragments, ashen faces in the snow, voices that whispered in languages you did not know, and tall, faceless figures that stood watching from behind trees. Then one night, the dreams changed again. You stood at the foot of a great mountain, its peak hidden in black storm. At the summit, there was a door, carved into the rock, ancient and sealed. You felt the terrible knowledge that something waited behind it, and worse, it knew your name. You woke soaked in sweat despite the chill, a scream caught in your throat. The next morning, you spoke to Cedra. She had not slept either. Her eyes were sunken, and her armor was still half-buckled. "There's a sickness in the air," she said. "Not one that strikes the body, but something else, something old." You both agreed to keep the village's findings quiet, for now. But secrets are brittle things, and they rarely stay hidden. By week's end, 2 scouts went missing. One was found 3 days later in the forest, curled in a hollow beneath a tree, eyes wide open and mouth frozen mid-scream. There was no wound, no sign of attack, just terror. The other never returned, and then came the noise. At first it was distant, a soft rumble, like thunder beyond the mountains. But it came every night, always at the same hour, and it grew closer. Some said it was the wind. Others said it was the voice from the mountain the Dunwich villagers had written about. You stood with Cedra on the walls one such night. Snow drifted through the air like falling ash, and the forest beyond lay still and black. "I was a child of the Empire," she said quietly, "born under banners of gold and eagle wings. I never believed in spirits, but now I think the world is older than we imagined, and it remembers." You didn't reply, because you felt it too. Something was coming, and it wasn't war, not in the way you'd been taught. It was deeper, quieter, the sort of war that crept into bones and memories, that stole names and dreams, until all that was left was silence. The blizzards worsened. Food began to vanish from the cellars. Rats chewed through leather and sacks. People began to whisper about leaving, but where would they go? The world was ice and shadow, and whatever lay beyond the mountain had started to move. One morning, as dawn painted the sky in bruised purple, you found a child sitting at the gate. She couldn't have been older than 10. Her feet were bare, her hair frozen with ice, but she smiled when she saw you. "They're almost here," she said sweetly. You stepped back, chilled not by her words, but by the way her breath didn't fog in the cold. She was gone before anyone else could see her. Cedra ordered double watches. The chapel bells were rung every hour, and still the people dreamed of tall doors in mountains and voices beneath the snow. And on the 7th night after the girl's appearance, the stronghold dogs began to howl, not in fear, but in recognition. The howling did not stop. It echoed through the valley for hours, rising and falling like the moaning of some ancient sea. The dogs tore their nails on the gates, whined at unseen things in the dark, then went still all at once, silent, ears perked, staring into the snow. Nothing moved, not even the wind. The following day, the sky remained overcast, a blanket of slate gray that pressed low against the hills. Smoke no longer rose from the houses in the stronghold. Fires burned lower now, as fuel was scarce. Cedra rationed the last of the cured meat. The flour had frozen into solid blocks. That night, the townsfolk held what they called the Hollow Feast. It was not a celebration. It was a remembering. Bread was broken. Wine was sipped. And names were spoken aloud. Names of the lost, the forgotten, the missing. Each name lit a candle. Each flame was left to burn down into darkness. You sat among them, unsure whether to feel comforted or haunted. The stories they told didn't feel like legends anymore. They felt like warnings. One woman recited a tale of the nameless season, a time when winter lasted 3 years, and the stars wept blood. A child described a dream of standing in a field of snow while dozens of hands reached from beneath it, grasping for her legs. A man had carved into his arm the words, "Remember the gate." He would not speak again. After the feast, Cedra summoned you. She showed you a map, hand-drawn and tattered. It marked a path through the mountain range to the east, a path that hadn't been walked in generations. She believed something was stirring in those peaks. "Whatever happened to Dunwich," she said, "I think it began there." You volunteered without hesitation. It would be you, Cedra, a young healer named Thane, and 2 veteran scouts, Brig and Olin. Supplies were gathered in silence. No goodbyes were spoken. The journey began under a sunless sky. The mountain path was steep and slick with hidden ice. Trees grew gnarled and black. Ravens watched you from the branches, unblinking. The cold no longer bit. It seemed to seep inside, whispering things you couldn't quite hear. On the second night, Tyne found an altar. It was built of stone, half buried in snow, and circled with the bones of birds. Carvings lined its sides, symbols older than the Empire, older than language itself. You touched one and saw a flash in your mind. A city of silver towers, burning, as a great shadow moved through its streets. You fell back, breath ragged. Cedra touched nothing. The deeper you climbed, the stranger the land became. Time grew soft, unfixed. One night felt like 3. Your dreams turned vivid, then unfamiliar. You heard your mother's voice, though she'd been dead for years. Brig claimed he saw his brother walking ahead of them in the snow, though his brother had never left the lowlands. On the 5th day, Olin vanished. There had been no scream, no tracks. He had walked ahead for firewood, then was simply gone. You searched until dusk, but it was as if the mountain had swallowed him. The silence became unbearable. Then, you reached it. At the summit of the final ridge stood a structure, not quite a temple, not quite a tomb. It was vast and dark, half sunken into the mountain itself. The air around it shimmered, though there was no heat. You saw carvings like those on the altar, and at its center, a sealed doorway. The same one from your dreams. The same one the girl had spoken of. Tane began to weep without reason. Cedra gripped her sword until her knuckles bled, and then the door breathed. Just once. A long exhale of ancient air, warm and wet and full of memory. You turned to flee, but your feet would not move. You don't remember entering, only the cold giving way to warmth, the stone beneath your boots becoming smoother, older, almost polished. The structure beneath the mountain breathed like something alive, its walls damp with condensation, whispering with voices that weren't there. Tyne lit a torch. The flame flickered oddly, casting shadows that stretched in the wrong directions. You descended a long spiral, each step echoing into an abyss. Cedra said nothing, though her blade remained drawn. Brig muttered prayers you'd never heard before. At the bottom, you entered a hall so vast that the torchlight vanished into it like smoke. Pillars rose like the trunks of trees, covered in glyphs that pulsed faintly. At the far end stood a statue, tall, cloaked, faceless. In its hands it held a bowl, and from that bowl came a sound, a hum. No words, just recognition. Tane stepped forward and dropped to his knees. "It knows," he whispered. "It remembers us." You weren't sure if he meant the statue, the place, or something else entirely. Then the visions began. Each of you saw something different. You saw the field where you were born, buried under snow, with your mother's voice calling you from under the earth. Brig saw fire, monasteries burning, screaming monks flung into the river. Cedra saw a child, her child, long dead, staring back at her with hollow eyes. Tane began to laugh. Softly at first, then uncontrollably. He whispered, "We're inside its memory now. We're part of its dreaming. You wanted to run, but your feet were not your own. You felt as if you were being watched from within." Then the floor cracked, just a hairline fracture, but the sound was enormous, like the scream of a dying world. The torch flickered out. Complete darkness swallowed you. You felt the air shift, heard breathing, not yours. In the black, someone began to hum, a child's lullaby, ancient and familiar. And then something answered. You never saw what moved in the dark, but you felt it, like being stared at by something with 1,000 eyes and no face. Sidra grabbed you, yanked you back toward the stairs. You climbed blindly, heart hammering, breath ragged. "Behind you," Briggs screamed. You didn't turn. You didn't look back. Outside, the sky had changed. It was night, though only minutes had passed. Stars you didn't recognize burned blue and red above. Cedra vomited in the snow, gripping her head. Tyne sat down and began to speak in a language you'd never heard. You realized something had come back with you. Something from beneath the mountain. That night, your dreams changed again. You dreamed of a mirror that showed not your reflection, but a stranger who wore your skin. Of a fire that refused to burn out. Of hands reaching from a doorway and pulling the stars down. And when you woke, the first thing you saw was a mark. On your wrist, a glyph, glowing faintly, like the ones in the tomb. You tried to hide it. The mark, covered it with cloth, with gloves, even dirt. But it burned sometimes, not painfully, but like something remembering your skin from before you were born. Cedra noticed, of course. She watched you now with the same expression she used when scanning distant forests for raiders. Focused, untrusting. "You didn't leave the same way you entered," she finally said. Neither of you spoke of Brig. Back at the stronghold, things were worse. Another child had gone missing during the night, and wolves were seen closer than ever. The snow no longer fell in gentle flurries. It came in waves now, thick and fast, as though the sky were trying to bury the world. People were frightened, and frightened people listen to anyone who promises certainty. That's when the messenger arrived. He came on foot, cloaked in oilskin, face hidden beneath a wooden mask, carved like a laughing skull. No one saw from where he came. He walked into the main square and waited until someone dared to ask what he wanted. He didn't speak. He handed over a scroll, bound in red cord, to you. It was your name, written in a language that hadn't been spoken in centuries. Cedra swore when she saw it. "You should burn it," she muttered. "Whatever this is, it's not for the living." But of course you read it. You had to. The scroll described a path through the forest, one that didn't exist on any map. It spoke of a gate carved into the side of a cliff, beneath roots as thick as towers. It said the glyph on your wrist was a key. It called you a vessel. That night, your dreams returned. Only now, they were not dreams. You walked through black halls that remembered you. You spoke to a mirror that asked questions in your voice. You opened a door with no hinges, and behind it, saw every version of yourself that had ever lived, and some that had not. When you awoke, the mark had spread. It now circled your entire forearm, like a serpent eating its tail. You didn't tell Cedra, but you knew what you had to do. You left before dawn, with only a knife, a flask of water, and the scroll hidden in your cloak. The stronghold was still half asleep, smoke curling from chimneys into the frostbitten sky. No one saw you slip through the gate. The forest swallowed you quickly. It was not the same forest you had known. This part felt older, as though each tree had grown watching the world forget itself. Their bark bore strange knots, some of them shaped like eyes, or teeth, or closed fists. And the snow here was tinged faintly gray. You followed the directions from the scroll, more by instinct than clarity. The path wound beneath stone arches and over half-frozen streams, past broken statues covered in lichen. You passed a toppled obelisk with a language carved in spirals, and for a moment, your mark pulsed faintly. On the second night, you lit no fire. The wind carried whispers, not words, but fragments of sound, like someone breathing in your ear just as you drift off to sleep. You tried to hum to keep yourself sane. An old lullaby, the one your mother used to sing when wolves howled too close. On the third morning, you reached it. The gate. It was exactly as the scroll had described, embedded in a cliff, roots woven like veins around a door carved of black stone. In its center, a circular depression the size of your forearm. You pressed your marked skin into the stone. At first, nothing. Then warmth, a sound like thunder beneath the earth. And the gate opened, not swinging but melting, stone flowing away like wax. Inside, a staircase curved downward into darkness, lit faintly by moss that glowed with sickly green. You descended, for what felt like hours. The air grew heavy, your breath misted with heat, not cold. The walls were covered in carvings, of people, of beasts, of something in between. A history not taught, not remembered. At the bottom, you found a chamber. It was circular. At its center, a dais, and atop it, a bowl filled with silver water, perfectly still. You approached. When you looked in, the surface rippled, and you did not see your reflection. You saw 100 faces, all yours, all different. Some smiling, some screaming, some wearing crowns, others bound in chains. You staggered back. From behind the dais, a figure stepped into the light, not masked, not armed, just a man in a robe, with eyes that shimmered like molten glass. "We've waited," he said. "For you." You tried to speak. You couldn't. "Do you know what you are?" he asked. "What you carry?" You shook your head. He gestured to your arm. "That's not a mark. It's a sentence." You felt the weight of it then, not on your flesh, but in your soul. "You can turn back," the man said. "Forget this. Go home. Live and die as nothing more than a frightened survivor in a dying world." He stepped aside, revealing another door, this one made of iron and bone. Or you can walk through and become what you were always meant to be. The snow began to thaw, but the cold refused to leave. Patches of mud replaced the once pristine white drifts, and with them came the stench of rot from whatever the snow had concealed. Life stirred again, uneasily. The stronghold's gates creaked open more often. Scouts were sent out farther, and people began to speak with the haunted quiet of those waiting for something worse. You were among the few chosen to explore the old crypts beneath the ruined chapel, a place no one had dared enter in years. Cedra said it was a matter of necessity. The food stores hidden below might help them survive another month. But the way she avoided your eyes made it clear there was more. The entrance was buried beneath rubble and frost. It took half a day to dig it clear, the passage down slick with moisture and lined in cold, breathing stone. The air changed as you descended. It grew heavier, older, filled with a damp silence that clung to your skin. Your torch flickered violently once you crossed the threshold into the deepest chamber. You found bones first, not scattered, but arranged, carefully. Some knelt in circles, as if praying. Others were chained to the walls, their mouths open as if screaming. But there was no sound, not even the scurrying of rats, only the stillness of centuries. At the far end stood an altar, cracked down the middle. Behind it, a mural. It was old, the paint faded, but you could still make out the shape of a man kneeling beneath a black sun, arms lifted as flame poured from his mouth. Carved beneath it in ancient script were the words, "In silence, it came. In silence, it ruled." One of your companions, a boy named Jaren, reached for a small wooden box resting atop the altar. You tried to stop him. Too late. The air shifted. The flame of your torch turned blue. And then, the whispering began. It didn't come from one direction. It came from everywhere. From the cracks in the walls. From inside your own head. You heard your name. Once. Then again. But it wasn't your voice. You ran. You all did. Jaren didn't make it. You don't remember how you got out. You only remember the sunlight hitting your face again, and the look in Cedra's eyes when you told her what had happened. She didn't ask what you saw. She only said, "We shouldn't have gone down there." That night, the whispering followed you into sleep. You dreamed of the black sun, of fire in your throat, and of chains made not of iron, but of words. The days that followed your descent into the crypt were wrapped in quiet fear. Jaren's name was never spoken aloud again. His family tied a strip of black cloth to the oak in the courtyard, and that was the end of it. The silence was a weight you carried, heavier than the sword on your hip. Cedra tightened patrols. No one was allowed near the old chapel anymore. The entrance to the crypt was sealed with stones and pitch, blessed by the village's old priest, who had once been a drunk and now seemed sober with fear. But still, every night, you heard them. The whispers. They didn't speak in language. They spoke in memory. The creak of your father's boots on the floor, the smell of your mother's stew, the look your brother gave you the night the fire came. All twisted, all wrong. And you weren't the only one. One night, a woman named Elswith threw herself from the watchtower. No note, no screams, only the wind and the sound of her bones breaking on the stones below. Another man was found kneeling by the chapel door, bleeding from the ears, muttering a prayer in a tongue no one recognized. Despite the dread, survival pushed forward. The snow melted fully, revealing dead fields and rotting fences. You joined the others in the long, grueling work of replanting. Turnips, barley, onion bulbs saved from the cellar. Children were put to work chasing crows. The old were tasked with mending tools or tending fire. It was Hesta, the elder woman, who suggested baking bread again. "Bread makes people remember," she said, her eyes foggy but still sharp. "It brings back warmth, even if only for a bite." So the ovens were cleaned, and the young were taught how to knead. You were sent to gather salt from the old marsh road, a dangerous journey, but one you welcomed. anything to leave the whispering behind. The road was half collapsed, lined with broken carts and skeletons of trees. You walked with 3 others, all armed, all quiet. A fog settled over you as the marsh came into view, thick and cloying. There, in the midst of the reeds, you found it, the old salt well, still intact, still glistening, but you weren't alone. Shapes moved in the mist, not men, too tall, too thin. They made no sound, no movement toward you, only watched. You didn't speak. You only gathered what salt you could and left, hearts pounding, blades drawn. Back at the stronghold, the bread was baked, coarse, dense, but it smelled like home. People smiled again. For the first time in weeks, laughter rang out by the fire. But you knew. Something had come back with you from the marsh. Not a thing of flesh, a presence. It sat in the corners of the room. It waited when you slept. And it, too, remembered the taste of bread. The stronghold's bell hadn't rung in months. Its sound, once used for alarms, for calls to worship or warnings of raiders, had gone quiet with the snow. But on the first morning of the thaw, just as sunlight spilled across the battlements, the bell rang. Once, low and hollow. No one had pulled the rope. Cedra cursed under her breath. Others clutched at charms, whispered to old gods. You climbed the tower with her, blades drawn, eyes scanning for signs of intrusion. Nothing. The rope was still tied to its beam. The bell, cold to the touch. That day, a storm rolled in, not of rain or snow, but of wind. It screamed across the mountains, bending trees, shaking shutters, tearing loose the thatch from roofs. The people called it the hollow wind, for it carried voices. Not real ones, they insisted. Only memories, regrets, and somewhere in that cacophony, a melody. You heard it one night, while out repairing a broken palisade. A soft tune, like a lullaby you'd never learned, drifting through the trees. You followed it. You knew you shouldn't have, but you did. It led you to a small glade, untouched by snow, where a ring of stones stood like teeth. In the center, a child sat, alone, wrapped in rags, eyes pale and glowing faintly in the dark. She spoke, though her lips did not move. "They are coming," the voice echoed in your skull. "They remember who they were. They remember you." You blinked, and she was gone. Only the stones remained, cold and ancient. You didn't tell anyone, not even Cedra, but from that moment on the wind never seemed to stop. In the days that followed, several of the old folk began to speak in tongues. One blacksmith carved runes into every tool he touched. A midwife vanished, leaving behind only her shoes in a perfect line at the edge of the well. And still, the wind blew. Cedra called a gathering. All who could walk were brought into the chapel. There, she made her voice heard. This place must be defended, not from raiders, not from hunger, but from, whatever it is that stirs in the hills. She passed out weapons, spears, axes, arrows dipped in pitch. Some of the villagers wept. Others nodded grimly. You volunteered to scout the northern path, the road that once led to the capital before the plague came. You traveled with 2 others, Bryn, a young hunter with a hawk's gaze, and Morris, an ex-monk who now carried a sword heavier than his old scriptures. The road was overgrown, nature reclaiming what man had forgotten. You moved quietly, carefully, until you saw the smoke. Not black smoke, blue. It curled into the sky like ink, rising from the ruins of an old fort. There, you saw them. Figures cloaked in ash and bone, dozens of them, standing still, faces hidden behind masks carved from wood and wax. At their center stood a man, arms raised to the sky, whispering in a voice that didn't match his throat. The wind howled louder. You didn't stay to learn more. You ran. When you returned to the stronghold, the bell rang again, this time 3 times, and the wind laughed. That night, Cedra gathered the remaining elders. You were invited to the meeting, not because of your rank, but because you had seen the masked figures. What you described made even the bravest among them pale. They spoke of the sigil, a symbol etched deep into the foundations of the stronghold. Carved by the founders, it was said to keep the oldest dark at bay. Most thought it superstition, an old folk tale to comfort frightened children. But when they lifted the stone slab in the chapel's floor, the sigil was broken, split right down the middle, as if by an unseen hand. The air around it was colder than the rest of the chamber, and the torches flickered when none of you moved. The elder priest, Father Relin, fell to his knees and began weeping. "We've been forsaken," he muttered. "The mark is shattered, the oath undone." No one spoke after that. The next day, Cedra ordered every able-bodied person to reinforce the walls. Children carried stones, elders cooked non-stop, and the smiths worked until their hands blistered. There was urgency now, panic, thinly veiled as productivity. You returned to the glade of stones, hoping to find the child again, but only snow and silence greeted you. No footprints, no melody, just an eerie stillness. As you turned to leave, a raven landed on the largest stone. It cawed once and stared at you with obsidian eyes. Then it spoke, in a voice that sounded like dry leaves on the wind. He remembers your name. You ran. When you returned, you found chaos. One of the lookouts had fallen from the tower, his body twisted, face frozen in horror. Another woman had disappeared during the night. Her room was empty, her bed untouched. And again, the bell rang, 5 times. That evening, Cedra called for a fire to be lit in the center of the courtyard, not for warmth, but for protection. It burned through the night. People took turns feeding it with old wood, books, anything they could spare. You took first watch. And as the others slept, you stared into the flames and thought about the sigil. What had broken it? And why now? In the flicker of firelight, you saw something, only for a heartbeat, a tall figure, standing beyond the walls, watching, then gone. You didn't sleep. The next morning, you and Bryn went to the old Scholar's Tower, the one no one entered since the plague. You were looking for texts, answers. Inside, you found rot, dust, shelves of mold-eaten tomes. But one book survived, bound in bark, sealed with wax. It pulsed faintly when you touched it. Bryn warned against opening it. You opened it anyway. It told of the Ashborn, a cult as old as the first stones. Not men, not anymore. They shed their names in fire, their faces in wax. They served the Forgotten One, the voice that speaks through wind and bone. You remembered the child's warning. They remember you. But why you? Why now? Before you could read further, the pages turned black, as if soaked in ink from within. The book grew warm, then burned. You dropped it just in time. Bryn stomped out the flames, but the words remained etched in your mind. They are already inside the walls. That night, the bell rang 7 times, and no one had touched the rope. Snow fell thicker now, blanketing the world in silence. The wind howled less like weather, and more like something trying to speak. Days passed in a fog of dread. Every creak in the wood, every flicker of torchlight stirred suspicion. You were assigned to the western wall, the oldest section, partially collapsed, barely held together with old stone and faith. Bryn joined you, along with 2 others. Jaren, a blacksmith's son with strong hands and a nervous laugh, and Tala, a seamstress turned archer. The night before your watch, Cedra gathered the 4 of you. "If the bell rings 8 times," she said quietly, "don't wait for orders. Light the green fire and run. You didn't ask what the green fire was. You didn't want to know." The next evening, you climbed the rickety tower that overlooked the trees. Beneath you, the woods seemed endless, dark spines under a gray sky. You scanned the horizon, trying to ignore the way Garen kept touching the small iron talisman at his neck. "What's it for?" you asked. "Luck," he said. "Or my mother. Same thing." The watch passed uneventfully until the 3rd hour. Then came the sound. It wasn't footsteps exactly, more like dragging, a shuffling presence in the distance, just beyond the line of trees. All 4 of you peered into the dark, torches raised, and then you saw them. Figures, dozens, no hundreds, moving slowly, without rhythm or voice, masked, cloaked, arms limp. They didn't speak, didn't cry out, just moved as if drawn by a thread. "The Hollow March," Bryn whispered. "I read about them. You didn't ask. You didn't breathe. They stopped just beyond the tree line, as if waiting." Garen reached for his bow. Tala raised her hand. "Don't. Not unless they cross the ward stones." And they didn't. Not that night. But they stayed, watching. When you returned to the courtyard, panic had already begun to spread. A baby wouldn't stop crying. Dogs barked at nothing. Someone claimed to see firelight in the north. Cedra kept the green fire unlit. That night, no one slept. By morning, half the sentries had fallen ill. Fever, bleeding from the eyes. Father Relin tried to help, but collapsed mid-prayer. His breath came in hisses, like he was choking on smoke. The Hollow March did not move. They simply waited. 3 days passed. Supplies began to dwindle. The well froze over. The wolves grew bolder, circling the outer walls like they knew something. You tried to distract yourself, mending gear, organizing grain sacks, checking arrowheads, anything to avoid staring into the trees. On the 4th day, the bell rang. Once, twice, 3 times. You froze. By the 7th chime, Cedra was already at the green fire's base. The 8th chime never came. Instead, silence. No wind. No birds. No movement from the Hollow March. Then, from the tree line, something stepped forward. It was not cloaked. It did not wear a mask. It wore your face. Bryn screamed. Garen ran. Tala notched an arrow but never fired. The figure raised one hand and pointed directly at you. Your name rang in your ears. Not shouted, not spoken. Just heard. You collapsed. When you woke, you were in the infirmary. Bryn sat beside you, eyes hollow. "They're gone," he said. "Garen, Tala, Cedra. What do you mean gone?" "No blood, no signs of struggle, just gone." Outside, the snow had stopped, but the Hollow March still waited. The world had gone numb, not from cold alone, but from something deeper, like time itself had slowed to a crawl. Each footstep echoed like a drumbeat in a tomb. You tried to focus on the small things, the flicker of a candle, the scratch of pen on paper, the feeling of your own breath fogging before you. The Hollow March remained at the tree line, still, unmoving. Their presence had become like a mountain, massive, silent, crushing. None dared approach them. None dared speak too loudly near the gates. And yet, some began to whisper, They whispered of the lake. It lay north of the stronghold, past the pine barrens, and under the shadow of Mount Glass. Frozen most of the year, it was said to be bottomless, a place where voices echoed beneath the ice. In times of old, the lake had been considered sacred, where druids once prayed and kings once drowned. Hesta, frail and blind in one eye, came to you in the morning, holding a leather-bound book older than memory. "You were marked," she said. You looked away. "No shame in it," she continued. "Many are. Not all survive." The book contained drawings, maps, symbols older than the church. At the center of the final page was a sigil, the same one etched into the cloth you'd once tied to the ancient oak. The mark of the lake. That afternoon, you left the stronghold with Bryn. No one stopped you. Perhaps no one dared. The journey north was brutal. Winds sliced through furs. Snow reached your knees. More than once, you thought of turning back, but the whispers kept you moving. By the second night, you reached the lake. It stretched out like silver glass, smooth and untouched, save for a single black fissure near the center. A thin column of steam rose from it, though the air was freezing. "This feels wrong," Bryn muttered. You said nothing. Instead, you stepped onto the ice. It did not creak. It did not crack. It welcomed you. As you neared the fissure, you heard it. A voice, not words, not language, just invitation. You dropped to your knees and stared into the crack. There was no bottom, no reflection, just blackness. Then slowly images rose from the depths. A battlefield, a tower in flame, a woman crying in a language you didn't know, a child's hand holding yours, the mark glowing red across your palm, and then yourself, older, colder, crowned. You stumbled back. Bryn caught you. "We should leave," he said. You agreed. But something had changed. The walk back was silent. The world around you no longer felt entirely real. Colors were too bright. Sounds too sharp. Trees whispered your name in the wind. When you returned, the gates were shut tight. But the hollow march was gone. Vanished. In their place, a circle had been burned into the snow. Perfect. Charred. Empty. Cedra's sword lay in its center. No blood. Just the sword. And beside it, a symbol etched in ash. The same sigil from the book. The mark of the lake. You picked up the sword. It hummed in your hand. The snow had lessened, but the cold had only grown deeper. More cutting. More absolute. Beneath the ash-colored sky, you stood beside Cedra and the remaining defenders at the broken edge of the stronghold's wall, watching the horizon. The trees beyond were skeletal shadows, and beyond them, smoke. Not from hearths, from torches. The warlords were coming. For weeks, scouts had returned breathless with word of growing armies moving south. Ragged banners bearing symbols you did not recognize. Armored men on horses, marching with discipline unknown to these lands. Even the wolves had gone silent. The elders had convened, arguing deep into the night. Some wanted to flee. Others argued to open the gates, to kneel and plead mercy. Cedra only listened, and in the silence of that meeting, she finally spoke. "We fight." She said it like a priest speaks final rites. So you prepared. Weapons were sharpened. Arrows fletched. Food rations divided to the last crumb. The chapel became an infirmary. The children were hidden in the root cellar, taught silence. Songs faded from the fire circles. All became tension. You and a dozen others rode out at dusk toward the northern ridge, hoping to ambush a scouting party. The wind howled through the birches like ghosts. Your breath was shallow. Your hands trembled despite the gloves. And then you saw them. A small group, only 6 men, gathered around a crude map by firelight. Their armor bore the black and gold sigil you had only heard described. You waited in silence until Cedra gave the signal. The attack was quick, brutal. You killed a man with your own hands. You remember the warmth of the blood, his face, the way he gurgled your name, though he could not have known it. One of them was taken alive. He would not speak, even under fire, only whispered a single sentence before biting down on something hidden in his cheek and dying in seconds. The eye has opened. You didn't know what it meant. Cedra didn't either, but she was pale when she heard it. By the time you returned, another village had fallen. No survivors. Just a trail of black ash where homes once stood. It was clear now. This wasn't just conquest. It was cleansing. You helped dig trenches in the frozen soil, placed sharpened stakes, reinforced the gate. Even the old chapel bell was melted down for arrowheads. There were no illusions. You were not warriors. You were survivors standing against a storm. And when the storm came, it was unlike anything you had imagined. The morning they arrived, the sky was black, not from night, but from smoke. You stood on the ramparts as the first wave appeared over the hill. Ranks of soldiers in dark mail, their banners rippling like wings of carrion birds. At their head, a rider cloaked in crimson. You didn't know his name, but you felt it in your bones. This was the one they called Prophet. Cedra gave no speech. She simply nodded once, drawing her sword. The battle began with horns, long and low, echoing off the stone, and then they surged forward like a tide of steel. The first impact shook the gate. Arrows rained down from above, piercing shields and flesh. You fired until your fingers bled. They breached the wall by midday. You fought beside Cedra near the chapel. Mud and blood soaked the ground. People you had eaten with, laughed with, died around you. You killed again, and with every enemy who fell, another seemed to rise behind him. The Prophet never entered the fray. He watched from a rise, unmoving. By nightfall, you were forced back to the courtyard. Fires burned unchecked. The great oak at the center of the stronghold, once a symbol of hope, was ablaze, its roots cracking beneath the heat. You found yourself near it, clutching a broken spear. Then came silence. They stopped. The Prophet descended slowly into the courtyard. He moved like smoke, his face shadowed beneath a hood. Around him, even his soldiers knelt. He looked at you, then at the tree, and spoke a single word: remembered. You didn't understand until he drew a blade of black glass and struck the earth. The world cracked. A roar of fire burst skyward from the oak's roots, and a light, not flame, not magic, but memory, rippled through the air. For a moment you saw the faces of those long gone, your mother, the boy you once were, Hesta, the burned messenger, even Cedra's younger face, laughing before the wars. And then it was over. You woke outside the walls, alone. The stronghold was gone. In its place, scorched earth, a circle of ash, and the blackened stump of a tree. You wandered for days. Something had changed. The land seemed quieter. Birds returned. Snow melted faster. You met others, survivors from other villages, who had dreamed of fire and woke miles from where they slept. Some said the Prophet died with the tree. Others believed he was never real. But in your dreams, he still stands by the fire, waiting. And so you walked. Toward what? You did not know. But each step was your own. Weeks passed, or perhaps months. Time had loosened its grip on the land. The days grew longer, the nights softer, but something deeper had shifted, less visible than the burned forests or the empty valleys, but present nonetheless, as though the world had been paused and then resumed to a different rhythm. You traveled east, following broken roads and overgrown tracks, sleeping beneath stars that seemed somehow brighter. You no longer feared the woods, nor the howls that echoed in the dark. The land itself felt like it had exhaled a breath held for centuries. In one ruined village, you found a group of survivors rebuilding. Children carried water in carved gourds. An old woman taught songs to a circle of young voices. They welcomed you with quiet nods. No questions. You were not the only one walking out of the ashes. You stayed 3 nights, helped mend a collapsed roof, told stories by firelight, some true, some changed in the telling. You realized that your name had begun to drift from your lips less often. People now simply called you the Walker. It was enough. Beyond the river, the land grew unfamiliar. Trees taller, wind sharper. You followed rumors. A monastery untouched by war. A library that had survived the burning. A place called Vire where the stars could be read like scripture. You weren't sure if any of it was true. But then, you met the blind man. He sat on a hill of bones, surrounded by wind chimes made from melted iron and driftwood. His eyes were gone, covered by a cloth stitched with silver thread. And still, he saw you. "You carry the silence," he said. You didn't answer. He offered you tea. It was bitter and warm. "You've touched the ash, haven't you?" he asked. "And lived through the name fire. That's rare." You asked who he was. "No one," he replied. "But once I was like you. And if you're walking east, you should know. The mountain remembers." That night, your dreams turned red again. You saw the prophet, or something that had worn his shape. But now he was not a man. He was a shadow with fire for veins, and he whispered in voices not meant for this world. When you awoke, the blind man was gone. His hill of bones, gone. Just snow and wind. But a path had opened in the trees. You took it. For 3 days you walked in silence. On the 4th, you found a boy, no older than 12, sitting on a log, carving a whistle. He looked up, unafraid. "I saw you in a dream," he said. You didn't know how to answer. "Will you take me with you?" he asked. You hesitated, but nodded. The road was long, but now it was not yours alone. Spring did not come all at once. It arrived like a memory, faint at first, uncertain, and easily doubted. But then the ice in the river cracked. The wind changed its tone. Somewhere beneath the soil, green things stirred. You and the boy crossed into a region untouched by fire. The trees there were tall and swayed with voices you hadn't heard since childhood. The sky was less gray. Birds returned in small groups, their songs tentative, like testaments of belief. You made camp near a crumbling stone bridge. It had once marked a border, between 2 kingdoms now vanished. Moss covered the royal crest. The boy asked what it meant. "Nothing," you told him. "Not anymore." But something inside you stirred, a strange ache, a feeling you could not name. You dreamt again, this time not of fire, not of the prophet or the voices from the mountain, but of home. A true memory, your mother humming as she stirred soup, the flicker of candlelight on a wooden table, the small dog curled at your feet, the smell of dust and barley. It broke you in ways battle never had. In the morning, you cried. The boy didn't ask why. He simply sat with you, whittling another whistle, and handed you the one he'd finished. It sounded like the wind when you blew it, like breath through empty halls. You pressed east. At the edge of a cliff, you saw it. Veer. It wasn't a city. Not exactly. It was a sprawl of carved stones and tents, of stairways etched into the mountain. Fires flickered on balconies. Cloth banners danced like flames in the updraft. People were there. Dozens. Hundreds. Climbing. Singing. Reading scrolls aloud. A place of memory and rebuilding. They welcomed you, not as strangers, but as expected guests. An elder, her skin lined like tree bark, offered you a place in the lower levels, not as a fighter, not even as a scout, but as a teller. We remember through the telling, she said, and what you carry must be remembered. You lived there. Not long, not short, just enough. The boy grew, learned their words, learned to listen to the stars. One night, he stood in the same hall where you'd been given your room and said, "I think I'll head north." You gave him your old cloak, the same one you wore the night snow first fell outside the stronghold. "Tell it true," you said. He smiled. "Of course." Years passed. You carved your story on stone, alongside 100 others. You watched new fires lit by younger hands. The mountain bloomed with light. When your hair turned silver, you went to the courtyard, where a tree older than any ruin stood in silence. You tied a final strip of cloth with your name, not for luck, not for the gods, just so the wind would carry it a little farther. And in time, the snow melted completely. The soil breathed, and the world began again. Years passed, like pages turned in a book no longer read. The storms waned. The land, once scorched and bloodied, softened beneath the weight of time and new growth. The stronghold where you had once fought, mourned and survived, became a quiet place, not abandoned, merely still. Moss crept over the stones. Birds nested in the watchtower. The great oak in the courtyard grew broader, its limbs outstretched like arms remembering every name tied to it in cloth. You stayed there longer than you ever thought you would. Long enough to see a child born and named after someone who never returned from the snows. Long enough to grow lines on your face, and silence in your soul where once there was fire. One spring, when the ground thawed early and the sky seemed impossibly wide, you walked beyond the stronghold's gates. No one stopped you. There were no farewells, only nods, soft and knowing. You walked east, past the last standing stones, into hills that no longer held fear, but memory. What you found, or didn't find, no one ever knew. But some nights, when the wind is just right, the young ones say they hear footsteps in the dew, a voice in the trees, a figure at the edge of the firelight, wrapped in a faded cloak, and they wonder if it's you, still walking, still remembering, or maybe just watching, making sure the dark never fully returns.